today is focused on a very important set of leadership lessons that will be shared to us by Alan Shaw as the CEO of Norfolk Southern. So I'll ask Alan and Katie Kirkpatrick to come to the stage to share some of their experiences and leadership lessons. And we will later in the discussion have an opportunity for questions and answers. So again, when you have questions, please come to the mic and we'll recognize you. So Katie and Alan, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. All right, big crowd, Alan. You're quite the draw. So I think we have a lot to cover today, but before we do, I want to do a brief introduction of Alan for the Rotary members here today. It's my pleasure, of course, to sit with Alan Shaw, President and CEO of Norfolk Southern. Alan leads one of our nation's largest freight transportation companies, which serves nearly every aspect of our economy, whether it's lumber for new homes. I think I saw a stat that you could have built 300 something. Glenn, help me out here. There was a number of homes based on the number of timber and lumber that you all had exported in Georgia alone. It was a substantive number of houses that could have been built here in the state just by the lumber that you all carried on your trains. Grain for our breakfast cereal, or that package that you ordered on Amazon. I think I have 5 sitting at my door right now. There's a good chance it's been pulled on a train owned by Norfolk Southern. Every year, Norfolk Southern delivers more than 7 million carloads around the country, filled with everything from agriculture to consumer goods. It's also the largest rail shipper of auto products and metals in North America, Steve Hennessy. Since he became president and CEO in 2022, so remember that number, 2022, not very long in this role, we have seen Alan drive a transformational change in the company's culture. The goal is to create what he calls a customer-centric, operations-driven service organization. That doesn't sound like a freight and logistics company. He's also leading the company's industry on rail safety, and I think it's beyond just the company as well. I think Norfolk Southern is also taking the lead as an industry for rail safety, enhancing its safety culture and working to make Norfolk Southern the gold standard of safety for the industry. So at the heart of these cultural shifts is a strategic vision for long-term value creation, which is what we would hope CEOs are focused on. So before leading Norfolk Southern, Alan was the company's chief marketing officer. Before that, he worked his way up the ranks over the course of nearly 30 years. In that time, Alan has gained a deep appreciation of the importance of customer service, and more specifically, customer relationships, both of which we'll touch on today as we talk about leadership. So Alan, thanks for being here. Please join me in welcoming Alan. So Alan, let's get right into it. Some would consider Norfolk Southern as one of our newer corporate citizens, although you've had a long history here in Atlanta. But you have also had a long history. Can you give us a sense of your presence here and your role in the economy that's here?
Yeah, gladly. You know, as we think about Atlanta, Atlanta certainly is the cultural, the economic, and frankly, the educational hub of the Southeast, which is frankly one of the strengths of our franchise. And so we're really proud to continue to expand our presence in Atlanta. If you can go back to like 1827, so about 180 years ago, and Atlanta was actually formed as the end of a rail line, which is where the name terminus came from. And then it was 25 years later, in the mid-1850s, all of a sudden Atlanta became a transportation and a railroad hub, which is kind of what fostered the commercial and transportation hub that is Atlanta today. So Atlanta has its roots deep in rail. We have our roots deep in Atlanta. Just last year or the year before, we donated all of Southern Company's, one of our predecessor railroads that was located here in Atlanta, all of Southern Company's historical archives to the Atlanta History Center. So we understand our role here. We've got a big presence. We have 5,400 Norfolk Southern employees who proudly call Georgia home. And as I think about our long-term vision that you spoke about, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, you know, we're investing. And we're investing in our infrastructure. And so we continue to invest in our intermodal terminals at Inman Yard and Austell, which are here in Atlanta, which really extends Atlanta's reach to the Port of Savannah and also to consumer product makers throughout the United States. We're investing in our people. We've hired about 1,400 people in Atlanta just within the last year alone. And our training center is located in McDonough, Georgia, which is just right outside of Atlanta. We're investing in our communities. We've just doubled our philanthropic giving budget. And our customers are investing too. I mean, rail is a significant economic driver for communities. And we've had about 90 customers expand production or locate new facilities on our lines within the last decade, investing almost $2 billion. And of course, the Hyundai plant that was just announced is a $5.4 billion investment, which blows it all away. And I can tell you, our customers have a lot of confidence in Georgia. Right now, we got a pipeline of about 40 projects that we're working on, and it's not just in Atlanta; it's in like 44 different counties, and so we've got a pretty good reach throughout the state.
Yeah, and I think we forget about that sometimes, the role that rail plays in economic development. We talk a lot about our airport, and we'll talk about the port, but the reason that it works here in Georgia is because the connectivity that rail provides, not only here in the state, but in the Southeast. And I can affirm what Alan is saying. It comes up quite a bit on projects about they're looking at the assets of a rail, road, and air when they're looking to locate here. So I can tell you those 2 new car plants that we have are largely driven by their ability to get their products to the port. And so thank you for doing that. That's allowing for investment here in the state. So let's talk a little bit, though, more about Atlanta and the culture that you're trying to drive within the organization. And how does that show up in Atlanta? Like, how does Norfolk Southern and the culture that you're driving show up here?
You know, we have to transform Norfolk Southern. 15 years ago, 35% of our revenue came from coal. Right, we were a big steel hauling, big coal hauling railroad, and that was great for then. But that's not the way the markets are headed right now. There's a lot more e-commerce out there, and e-commerce is really rail intensive, about 4 times more rail intensive than brick and mortar retail. So, your standard view of e-commerce is that UPS van or the Amazon van doing first mile, last mile through your neighborhood, and that's true. That package that you ordered, Katie, probably moved from a warehouse in Chicago to the Inman Intermodal facility on a Norfolk Southern train. So we handle that 800-mile warehouse to fulfillment center, and then Amazon or UPS do the first mile, last mile, which is one of the reasons Amazon and UPS are some of our larger customers. So we're transforming more to a customer-centric, consumer-oriented, truck-competitive market. And so we needed that kind of talent. And that's what Atlanta really brings to us, is this wonderful access to a technologically savvy, diverse workforce that can really help us innovate and inspire us to up our competitive effort.
Okay, so I'm going to tee off of that. So why did you decide, or why did the company decide to put the headquarters here in Atlanta? Because you had locations all over. So this was a consolidation for you all. Why Atlanta?
Yeah, we operate in 22 states, and we got about 5,000 customers. And frankly, we have 5,000 customers located on 6 different continents. And so when we were looking around, we wanted to be here. And we wanted to be here because it is an educational and a cultural hub, and it's a transportation hub, and it's got such great diverse talent. And I can tell you that our ability to access that talent is certainly living up to our expectations. And as I said, we've hired about 1,400 people in Georgia just within the last year alone. And so it's really having a big role in how we rethink about Norfolk Southern and focus more as a customer-centric, operations-driven service organization.
Your HR team must have been very busy to hire 1,400 people.
They have been.
That's a lot. But this is a consistent theme that we hear from companies when they're choosing this state or this region. It's because of the talent that we have here. And so for Lee Zach, I think I saw Lee here. I don't know if we have any of the higher education institutions here. You all matter on economic development and for our young people. So thank you for what you do. So are you seeing the benefits of the move? You've talked about the talent piece, but has there been other maybe consolidations or perhaps your operations center that's in your headquarters? Like, how is that all meshed together for you?
So let me give you a little bit of history, Katie. So Norfolk Southern was formed in 1982 with the merger of Norfolk and Western Railroad, which operated kind of in the Midwest and was headquartered in Roanoke, Virginia. And then the Southern Railroad, which was headquartered here. Now, when Norfolk Western and Southern merged, they wanted the new headquarters to be in a kind of a neutral, for lack of a better word, location. So we put the headquarters in Norfolk. We still maintain a headquarters presence in Roanoke, and we still maintained a headquarters presence here in Atlanta. And I've had the privilege of living in all three, but as we thought about collaboration, as we thought about breaking down silos at Norfolk Southern, as we thought about pulling our team together around a common goal, it became really clear that we needed to be in one location. And we wanted to be here. And I think what has surprised me to the upside is how welcoming the community is. I mean, one of my earliest memories, Katie, was a MAC board reception that you hosted. And I think it was the first time I met you. Oh, it was at David Abney's house, okay, if you recall.
Yeah. Great basement.
Yeah, it really is. But, you know, we had just announced that we were moving, and I was the chief marketing officer at the time. And so many people, citizens of Atlanta, came up to me and welcomed me and offered their assistance on anything with the move, whether it was professional or personal. And I remember going home that night, and I talked to my wife, and I was like, you know, moving's gonna be tough, but this place is really nice. And look, I lived my whole life in Virginia, and I'm used to Virginia hospitality, and that's a real thing. We love it here, and my family does too. We moved 4 kids, and I haven't gotten a day of static from anybody in my family. The community's been welcoming. We want to be really good corporate citizens. And so we built our new building in Midtown with a lot of public access area. The lobby's open to the public. We put a coffee shop on the first floor that's open to the public. We put a garden and a sculpture out front. We've got an artist in residency there that's all open to the public. And we've hosted alumni associations. Well, heck, we hosted the Rotary Club there last year. And we've hosted Georgia Tech Alumni Association, Georgia Alumni Association, Kennesaw State. And so Atlanta's been great to us. We're trying to give back to Atlanta just as much.
Well, and we're thankful for that. And I appreciate you highlighting that kind of civic responsibility and the fact that we do have a strong business community in terms of wanting to help one another succeed, and also helping you to settle into the new community. All right, so let's get into some leadership questions. And leaders are often defined by the challenges they face. So y'all recall he's been in this role since 2022. And you've faced a fair share of them in a very short time. So you had extraordinary global supply chain challenges, tense labor negotiations, and of course the derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, of which I think was on the news consistently for a long period of time. So that's also a challenge in leadership. So I want to talk about how you've approached each one of those challenges. So let's start with the pandemic and global supply chain congestion. How did Norfolk Southern and how did leaders respond within your company to those challenges?
Yeah, you know, I think broadly, when you think about a crisis, it reveals a lot about your character and it tests your resolve. But just as importantly, it gives you an opportunity to, if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to take a really hard look in the mirror and look at your company, it reveals your vulnerabilities as well. And I'm a lifer at NS, as you said. The crisis has given me the opportunity to look internally and say, here's some areas where, candidly, we got to get better, right? We got to change our approach. We got to change what we're doing here. And you wanted to talk first about the pen. Yeah, so, you know, we operate in a supply chain ecosystem, right? We've got, on one end of our lines is a port, another end is a warehouse or a JB Hunt or a UPS driver, right? And we understand our role. And we take a lot of pride in the fact that the Norfolk Southern employees came to work every single day out in the field during the pandemic. They showed up for work every day under really difficult conditions. But when we went to figuring out how to solve these problems, and look, we're not victims. It's our job to solve problems for our customers, which means we have to work with our customers, right? We gotta build trust with them. And that's kind of what we fell back on, is this concept of trust and working together within that supply chain ecosystem to solve a problem. Because you could do one thing, you could just throw costs over the fence at somebody else in the supply chain, and you'd be all right for a while, but that doesn't solve anything over the long term. And so I think about, the trust that we're building, and I think about 4 key constituents. It's our customers. With our customers, we want them to trust that we're going to give them a safe, reliable, and efficient service product so that they can build us into their supply chains over the long term. With our employees, they want to trust that we're going to give them a really good quality of life, and we're going to allow them to work safely. With our shareholders, they want to trust that we're going to take their capital and invest in it for the long-term best interest of Norfolk Southern and generate a good return. In the communities we serve, they want to trust that we're going to be safe, and that they want to trust that we're going to be that economic engine for growth and continue to invest in growth. And so out of the pandemic, and as I rolled into my position as CEO, we outlined a whole new strategy for Norfolk Southern. And it really is about the best interest of those key stakeholders and really a long-term balance between service, productivity, and growth. In the past, what you've seen in the rail industry, candidly, is if there's any sort of economic weakness, the rails kind of really address that by pretty significant cost cuts, and which would be furloughing employees, parking locomotives, parking rail cars. And then when the economy recovers, and it always does in the United States, we're such a great economy, but it always caught us by surprise, we never had the resources in place. And so we didn't have a good service product. So, we're students of history, and we saw that, every 3 or 4 years, if you give your customer a lousy service product, you're probably not going to be a growth company. And so we're investing in growth in the long term at Norfolk Southern, which takes a little courage to see through the current, headwinds associated with interest rates and inflation. But we've got a lot of confidence in our franchise and in our employees and our customer base. And so we're investing through that to provide that safe, resilient, and reliable service product over time.
Yeah, and thank you for continuing to work during the pandemic for all of us that needed those supplies at our house. We couldn't have done it without our delivery, our freight and logistics companies, and for the employees that actually came to work every day like you highlighted. I think we forget about them as unsung heroes during that time. So let's talk about East Palestine. What a critical moment and an inflection moment for leadership for you. So what were your thoughts and how did you approach the situation? And how's the company responding? I think we are 7 months post East Palestine. Like, where are you today? Did you anticipate that you would be here today when it was back in February? So just your thoughts on the challenge that East Palestine has presented.
That vision, that new strategy for Norfolk Southern is something that we had outlined at an investor day in December of last year. And it was put to the test with that derailment in East Palestine. But really, our response was perfectly in line with that strategy and our North Star of doing the right things for our customers, our employees, our shareholders, and the communities we serve. So, as soon as you get that call, you're like, okay, are there any injuries? No, that's good. And then we brought the team together in the immediate aftermath and said, we're going to do more than less here. We're going to do what's right. And we're going to come up with a solution so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we can look back on this and be really proud of what we've done. And more importantly, the citizens of East Palestine are going to look back at this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and be really proud of what we've done. So I went up there immediately. I've been back almost every week since, and it's basically to watch our progress make sure we're making progress here, but it's also to listen. You know, Norfolk Southern is a really, really strong company. We've got great financial resources, but this isn't about just cutting a check and running, right? This is about showing up and standing there and taking the heat. And so I went up there in the immediate aftermath, and I went into the churches, I went into the businesses, I went into the schools, and I went into the family rooms. And I apologized for the accident, said I'm terribly sorry for it, and I asked what we could do to help. I knew we could apply the resources, but I needed the community to tell us where it goes. And on any given day, we've got about 300 NS employees or contractors who are up there working on the environmental remediation or the community recovery or investing in the long-term health of the community. And what I find is when a lot of them come back here to Atlanta, you know, they want to go back. And I've even heard of NS employees cutting their vacation short because they want to go back. And that tells me two things. That tells me that the NS employees know we're having a positive impact on the community, and the community knows that NS is having a positive impact. And the community's having a positive impact on the NS employees. And so, yeah, those first 2 months when I went up there, those conversations were really, really rough. It's completely different now. We have turned the narrative. We're not done. But what we're doing is we're making promises and we're keeping promises. It goes back to that trust thing that we were talking about earlier. It all kind of like starts with trust and credibility.
Yeah, and so I think when you said that you've changed the narrative through action, not through words, or both.
Yeah, I didn't, no one
This wasn't like a PR campaign that made Norfolk Southern. It was because you all became active in the community.
Yeah, candidly, I didn't have any credibility there. I didn't have the right to say anything. I had the right to earn their trust. And that's what the NS team has done every day in the last 6.5 months.
So I'm curious, you talked about listening. Were there any conversations over the last 6 months that were interesting that came out of East Palestine, either with an employee or maybe a community member that struck you as important?
We have 15 NS employees who live in East Palestine, right? It's, again, we're part of the fabric of the communities we serve. It actually, East Palestine grew up as a railroad town. There's an old train depot there that we own that we just donated to the town. And so right after it happened, I sent an email to those 15 NS employees and I said, look, you know Norfolk Southern's values. You know we're going to do the right thing. You're in a tough spot because you represent Norfolk Southern and East Palestine. But I'm going to make you proud of how we respond. And one of them, he's a union employee, wrote me back a really heartfelt note, and then I asked if I could come see him. So it was a Saturday. I went up there and I went to his house, sat in his family room, met his wife and his little 3-year-old daughter, and he had invited a bunch of his neighbors and their spouses. And we had like a really, really hard conversation. And it was really emotional for me because I'm responsible for everything that happens. So as he was walking me out to his car, or my car, I asked him to work directly for me for a year. I said, I'll give you $1 million, not personally, right, but $1 million to spend. And I want you to figure out the highest and best use of this in the community. And you may have seen it, the AJC just profiled him about a week and a half ago. The gentleman's name is Jeremy Vernasevich. You ought to look it up. He's a really, really good person. And I think it underscores the DNA of Norfolk Southern of really trying to do the right thing for the communities we serve.
Yeah, and it imparts to the employee that they have accountability and responsibility to make an impact too, that it's not just at the senior leadership level. So it gives them some ownership, which I think is very important for employees wherever they are in the organization. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. So we all know that leadership never stops in terms of what we learn about leadership and how we excel as leaders. It requires endurance, which I think you've had to have over the last several months, patience and wisdom when navigating the opportunities and challenges that come your way. Besides the challenges we've already talked about, so setting those aside, what are some of the things that have shaped you as a leader? That might be something personal, it could be a professional story that you experienced in the workplace.
I've worked for NS for like 29, 30 years. First 5 years were in finance. And then the last 25, I was in a customer-facing role. And about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, maybe 15 years ago, I was put in charge of our chemicals group. And I followed somebody in our chemicals group who had not built trust with customers. He figured it was a declining market, and so his focus was really on getting as much value out of that customer base in the near term as possible. Whereas I'm much more of a relationship-oriented person, much more focused on the long term. And I had to repair a lot of relationships, and I had a lot of really difficult conversations with customers who were rightfully mad at us. And I knew I had to rebuild trust with them. And so it was just about each and every day investing in that and building credibility. And it got to the point where one of those customers who was the most fervently mad at me when we started effectively did a handshake deal with me at a bar one night. And we sketched it out, and it's still known within our chemicals group as the bar napkin deal, because we literally wrote it on the bar napkin. And now I'm like really close with his family. One of his grandkids starts at Emory tomorrow, and she stayed with us last night, and my family helped her move in. So it goes back to that relationship orientation, long-term view, and building trust, I think.
Yeah, trust is such an important leadership lesson, President John. I think we continue to hear that every time we have a leader on this stage talking about leadership, how trust is just the underpinning of what we do. So I just mentioned one item that's critical for being a leader. What are there other critical qualities you think that a leader needs to possess in order to encourage those that work for them to follow?
Yeah, I think it starts with humility, and you've got to earn that every day. And it's accountability, and it's reliability, and it's transparency. So humility, arrogance breeds complacency. A humble organization, a humble leader is one who's willing to listen and learn and adjust, recognizing that there's a lot of people around you who know a lot more about what's going on than you do. And if you think about accountability, when you think you're about to be CEO, you're really thinking about that long-term vision and all the really cool things you're going to get to do. But boy, when you sit in that seat in that first day, it really is just about accountability. That's all it is. And it's accountability to those four key stakeholders, your customers and your employees and your shareholders and the communities you serve. And so you've got to be really true to your word. And you got to make promises, and you got to keep them. And we've done that, right? I said when I became CEO, my first day was out in the field, engaging with our craft colleagues. I said, I'm going to work on quality of life issues with you that were not all that important to them before the pandemic, but social issues and quality of life issues really were accelerated during the pandemic. And so we became the first railroad to offer paid sick leave to every single one of our employees. I promised to make a safe railroad even safer. We're doing that. I promised to fix our service. We're doing that. We promised to work on our culture, and that's what we're doing. So it really is all about accountability.
So it's interesting to think about that you went through the whole new strategic planning and thinking process about 2 months before East Palestine. So I'm curious, having done that exercise and then having gone through the experience of East Palestine, has your leadership style changed? Or do you think any of it was enhanced because of that accident?
I think the incident up in East Palestine really, in the progress that we've made, Katie, and then the response to the progress that we made really reaffirms our approach that taking a long-term view of things, making things right, doing more than less, and being transparent and being visible is the right thing to do.
Okay, great. Well, I think, John, we are ready for questions. I just saw the slide. Timed it right. That's a Chamber of Commerce thing. Anyone have any questions for Alan? Just come to the mics. Remember, there's mic 1 and mic 2.
I sat in the right place this morning.
You did.
Is this on, I'm assuming?
Not on yet.
Not on yet?
Try it again.
How about now? Better? Better? Yelling is not an option. Thank you for being here. And we were delighted when we got to come to your building up for our Rotary on the Road. And we were more delighted when you gave the information or all the history to the Atlanta History Center here up on our stage. So thank you and your organization. I'd like to hear a little bit more granularity about what you did up in East Palestine, because sounds like a tremendous turnaround. And I love the fact that you gave one of your guys $1 million to get stuff done. But what did he do with it? And what are the other things that y'all did? Because I know it was, you've got lots of insurance and you've got lots of coverage, and it's one of the problems with doing business. But we've all got CEOs running businesses in here. We'd love to hear what you did more than just the top line.
Yeah, so we made 3 commitments. We said we were going to remediate the site environmentally, safely, and thoroughly. And we're making a lot of progress there. We're working with the US EPA. We've moved over 80,000 tons of soil off-site and 27 million gallons of water. We've announced that cleanup costs and all this stuff is going to cost about $800 million for us. We said that we were going to invest in the community, help the community recover, help the community thrive. And so as I walk around the community, my team talks to the community, we're really focused on where the community wants assistance. One of the things that's the community leaders took me to in the immediate aftermath was their park. They've got this wonderful 81-acre park in downtown that draws people from all around the area of Western PA and Eastern Ohio. And so we proposed a $25 million park revitalization project that City Council has approved. In total, we've committed over $65 million to the community, and that's just a start. There are more things that we're working on. We've hired an economic development professional to work with the community. It's a community of about 4,700 people. There's a lot of pride, the folks who live there, and they're all entrepreneurs. But I think it really goes back to this concept of team of teams, right? These ideas aren't coming from me. They're coming from the community, and they're coming from the 300 NS employees who are on the ground every single day. So during COVID, I read this book by General Stanley McChrystal, right? 4-star general, JSOC. And it's all about, he had to bring together, he was in theater in Iraq, right? And he had to bring together Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, regular Army, CIA, and all work together to try and fight Al-Qaeda. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense, right? Is bringing everyone together and really sharing a common consciousness and focusing on trust, collaboration, and communication. So remember the bar napkin story I told you, that customer? His son was commander of SEAL Team 8. And he and I were really good friends. The East Coast SEALs are in Virginia Beach. Your husband knows some of them, right? Yeah, we've talked about that. And so when I was in Virginia Beach and in Norfolk, I talked to him. I was like, is this stuff real? And he's like, yeah, this stuff really, really works. And so McChrystal's got a consulting firm in Arlington. He doesn't like to be in D.C. He likes to be in Arlington. I've been in D.C. a lot more than I wanted to this year, too. So we hired him to help us really focus on our cultural transformation that we talked about. And he gets up really early in the morning to work out, so do I. So I know if I call him at 4:30, I can catch him. So we typically talk pretty early in the morning. And, he's given me some advice on how to respond in East Palestine. And I talked to him, I guess it was April, and I was really starting to see the perspective shift. And he said, yeah, you're doing the right things. And he said to me, it's really easy to get the results you want in the short term by being a jerk. Anybody can do that. In the long run, you're successful if you're the leader you want to follow. And so that's been our approach as we've attacked this whole thing.
And more to come, right? Because you aren't done.
No, we're not done.
Not done in East Palestine, so there may be more lessons that we can learn from that. Stephanie?
Yes, transportation is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and rail, of course, is an important part of that. So I'd like to hear about your sustainability initiatives and specifically related to reducing your carbon footprint. Thanks.
Well, that you teed me up.
Right?
All right.
So we didn't plant that.
Rail is the green alternative to truck. Rail is so much more carbon efficient than truck. You know, that steel-on-steel interface of a rail wheel and a track is so much better than rubber tire on concrete. So rail is like 3 to 4 times more carbon efficient than truck. And over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of customers have become much more interested in reducing their Scope 3 emissions, and that's their transportation emissions. And they know that they can do that by shifting business away from truck to rail. And just in the state of Georgia, we estimate we save about 900,000 metric tons of carbon by taking trucks off the highway. So we're a solution there, and that's part of our growth story going forward.
So how do you add capacity?
We're not.
So I'm doing this math in my head about how do you move trucks off the road and onto rail, but if your rail lines are already full.
No, we're not full. If you
there
want to
you
ship
go.
anything more via rail, pick out Kathleen Smith's over there. She's in charge of business development for us. But we estimate that last year alone, we pulled about 3.9 million trucks off the highways in Georgia. So think about how much worse traffic could have been.
Oh gosh, no, don't do that. So I see that John is up, so I'm
So Alan, I want to ask a question. When it was asked of several other speakers in the past too, with regard to onboarding of new employees and leadership members, and how you create and inculcate that culture within your company to the newcomers coming into the business. Is there a process you follow that we can learn from, a way that when somebody enters the Norfolk Southern family, that they learn that set of values that you think are so important?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the NS leadership framework at Norfolk Southern, and we're really focused on making that more and more important to our employees, and frankly, screening employees for that framework. And it's about trust, it's about humility, it's this team of teams concept. It's about building bridges across the organization and helping others succeed. And it's about being willing to raise your hand and say, I need help. And so those are the types of things that are really important. And if you're good at that, you're going to be successful at Norfolk Southern.
All right, John, before you close this out, I actually do have one question. So I think a lot of us have seen a push over the last 30 years or so that you have to go get a 4-year degree, and anything less than that is, not acceptable. And by the way, and I saw Brian Blake, he just left. We love our 4-year institutions, believe they're valuable. But we also know that the trades are also important, and you have a lot of linemen that work on the rail. And have you all thought about how to build a pipeline of talent to come into the rail operations? And then second, you may not know this off the top of your head, it's actually quite a lucrative career. You can actually make really good money working on the rail line. And I think a lot of people don't know that. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on workforce.
Yeah, our average union employee makes about $110,000 a year and has premium health care benefits.
And you don't need a 4-year degree?
No, you don't. We'll train you. And that's why we have the world-class McDonough training facility just south of Atlanta. We will absolutely hire people with high school degrees or vocational degrees or technical degrees. We get a lot of people from the military as well, right? It's highly decentralized, it's outdoors, looking for people with initiative. And so we'll train folks. Our chief marketing officer, the person who replaced me, started as a brakeman at Norfolk Southern about 35 years ago. So that's one of the really neat things about NS. We do so many different things. No matter what you want to do, you can find that job at NS. And we'll invest in your development and training.
Thank you.
So Alan, maybe a final question. You talked about the economic ups and downs. You've seen those. Wondering if you can share with us where you think we are right now in those economic environments. We have a lot of folks here. We have a number of economists out in the audience too, but you obviously see it every day with what's loaded on your railroad. Where do you see us right now economically, and how do you see 2024?
A great question. With our 5,000 customers, we get this unique view. I think that the U.S. consumer is a little bit more resilient than even the Fed thought and is doing fairly well. The truck market's really weak right now, which creates some more competition for us. I think what's really interesting that we're seeing right now, and you're seeing it play out here in Georgia, and we just talked about it, is this: because of all these federal programs, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, because of cheap and reliable energy, because of a pro-business environment, right? Because of governors who are out there actively looking to bring in new business, because of people like you were in Australia earlier, right? You're seeing a lot of onshoring, and most of it's here in the Southeast. And in fact, new factory builds are now running at about 3 times what they were just in the decade of 2010 to 2020. And it's all happening in our service region. Kathleen, who's our business development person, tells me that 9 of the top 10 states for doing business are served by Norfolk Southern. So we see this manufacturing super cycle going on. Look, the U.S. consumer will always recover. So I'm not concerned about that at all. That's going to turn around for us. And that's why you couple that with the manufacturing and the onshoring, that's why we're really investing in the long term at Norfolk Southern. We got a lot of confidence.
That was the right answer, Alan. So let's look at some leadership lessons you highlighted today. Doing the right thing, listening carefully and sincerely, being about action, and going above and beyond. And I wrote another one down, Alan, that I thought was really appropriate. Be the leader that you want to follow, which I thought was very appropriate. So let's give Alan and Katie a hand for a wonderful presentation. And finally, continue with the logistics theme. Remember, next week, Rotary on the Road, Porsche's North American headquarters. If you haven't signed up, here's your QR code. We'll leave it up. Please sign up. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Have a wonderful afternoon.